And this is Africa 54. Under arrest, two alleged terror leaders are in custody after U.S. forces launched raids in Libya and Somalia over the weekend. One is blamed for the deadly U.S. embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania back in 1998. The Pentagon said senior al-Qaeda figure Anas al-Libi was seized in the raid in Libya. Libi, believed to be 49, had been indicted in the United States for his alleged role in the East Africa embassy bombings that killed 224 people. The U.S. government had offered a $5 million reward for information leading to his capture and the State Department's reward for justice program. Libi, also known as Nazi al-Raghi, was arrested at dawn in the Libyan capital, Tripoli. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who is attending a summit in Bali, talked to reporters about the raid.
We hope that this makes clear that the United States of America will never stop in its effort to hold those accountable who conduct acts of terror, and those members of Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations literally can run but they can't hide. We will continue to try to bring people to justice in an appropriate way with hopes that ultimately these kinds of activities against everybody in the world will stop.
The U.S. Defense Department has also confirmed it targeted a leader of al-Shabaab in southern Somalia, but that raid appears to have failed. The al-Qaeda-linked group claimed responsibility for last month's attack on a shopping center in Kenya. We have team coverage of the U.S. raids against the wanted terrorist suspects. First, we go to Scott Stearns at the Department of State. Scott, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Vince.
Now, for some time, it had been thought that the preferred method of getting terror suspects was targeted drone attacks. Now, is capturing them alive the new strategy here?
I wouldn't say it's part of a new strategy. Secretary Kerry says that it has always been the preference of the United States to capture suspected terrorists when possible, if only because of the intelligence information that you might be able to gain from them in an interrogation. That said, the Obama administration certainly has not shied away from drone strikes, certainly at a heavier clip than the George W. Bush administration. But if you go back to the raid in Abbottabad, for instance, that resulted in the death of Osama bin Laden, a drone strike on that compound in Abbottabad would have destroyed all of the significant evidence that U.S. Special Forces captured during that raid, and raises questions about whether you actually got the guy you were going after.
Now, Libya is being held at a U.S. Navy ship. Is this a way of getting around that issue of rendition, which was very controversial but popular with the Bush administration?
It certainly does remove some of the questions, the significant questions about renditioning a suspect in a third country. Many of those people who were renditioned during the Bush administration ultimately ended up in Guantanamo, which is a facility that President Obama says he wants to close. So in this case, by holding him on a U.S. Navy ship in the Mediterranean and having the interrogation there, and then transferring him to New York, where he'll be tried in a federal court as opposed to a military tribunal like the suspects at Guantanamo, that does remove that issue for the White House.
Very quickly, now, there's an official, actually, the Prime Minister of Libya said this is a kidnap. Does this mean that the U.S. does not consult the officials of that particular country?
Well, like the Osama bin Laden raid in Pakistan, local officials were not notified of this raid. The feeling is, obviously, if someone you're looking for is able to live in a certain country, there must be the suggestion that certainly some people in that country know he's there, and by notifying authorities, you might tip them off. Secretary Kerry was quick to say that in complaints from the Libyans that it's important to not have sympathy for alleged terrorists, but instead, Secretary Kerry said, to respect the importance of international law.
Well, thanks a lot, Scott.
Sure.
Scott Stearns, the State Department correspondent for The Voice.